We have some breaking news for you. The North Carolina legislature has just banned abortion after 12 weeks with few exceptions. Now, Democratic Governor Roy Cooper had publicly vetoed this bill on Saturday, but Republicans hold a veto-proof supermajority in the state house, which means that today the North Carolina State Senate and House were able to vote along party lines to override the governor. Their bill will become law, and the 12-week ban will take effect on July 1st. If anything demonstrates just how much these down-ballot measures matter and these down-ballot races, it is moments like these, and especially on a night like tonight, where there are elections happening right now in important down-ballot races. Polls have closed for primary races in both Kentucky and Pennsylvania, and we are keeping an eye on Pennsylvania, where just a few months ago, after a really drawn-out battle for control of the state house, Democrats flipped the chamber for the first time in 12 years. They hold the House by one seat for now, which is not nothing in the swing state of Pennsylvania. Remember back in 2020 when it very much mattered who controlled that state house. Trump and his allies reached out to then Republican Pennsylvania House Speaker Brian Cutler, seeking Mr. Cutler's help in overturning Joe Biden's win in the state. Some Republican members of the House tried intervening themselves, claiming that the results of the 2020 election were in dispute. Ultimately, that last-ditch attempt to intervene in the state certification of the 2020 results, that failed. But it all goes to show that who runs the state house matters. And tonight, the question of whether Pennsylvania Democrats get to keep control of it will be determined by two special elections, one in a Republican stronghold and the other in the suburbs of Philadelphia. As expected, the AP just announced that the Republican candidate running in that Republican stronghold has won. And then there is the state of Kentucky, where Trump-endorsed Attorney General Daniel Cameron has won the Republican gubernatorial primary. In November, Cameron will face incumbent Governor Andy Beshear, who is considered one of the most vulnerable Democrats in the country. Joining me now is MSNBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki, without whom we would all be lost. It is good to see you, Steve. It's election night. And it's not the big names, the household names that I think a lot of people are familiar with, but this is the machinery of governance and, in many ways, election integrity. Let's start first with the gubernatorial race in Kentucky. Andy Beshear, very vulnerable when it comes to the general. What do we know about Daniel Cameron, the Republican AG, who appears to be the person Beshear will be running against?
Yeah, Cameron getting a very convincing win in this Republican primary tonight. Interestingly, he ran with the endorsement of former President Donald Trump, but also with the endorsement of Mitch McConnell. And you know that Trump and McConnell have certainly been at loggerheads a bit these last couple of years. So he managed to unite the two of them, and really he managed to unite, as it turned out, the Republican Party in Kentucky pretty strongly behind him. Cameron, somebody a lot of Republicans nationally have been keeping an eye on for a few years. He had a speaking role at the 2020 Republican National Convention. And what this is really going to test in the fall is two things. Number one, Beshear, the Democratic incumbent, is personally popular in Kentucky when you poll that. But his party, the Democratic Party, obviously, and especially the national version of the Democratic Party, is extremely unpopular in Kentucky. So can Republicans take advantage of that partisan tendency in the state to just vote against Democrats because they don't like the party? Have they found a candidate as well who has some qualities of his own that might be appealing to voters? And can they knock off an incumbent Democrat who's personally popular? Worth remembering, when Beshear won that office 4 years ago, it was against a very personally unpopular Republican. The margin was just about 5,000 votes.
As far as the Secretary of State race, we played an ad from Stephen Nipper, who was running in this primary. He was the person that was railing against George Soros and saying that voters outnumbered citizens in the state. He appears to have been beat by Michael Adams. Can you tell me a little bit more about Michael Adams as Secretary of State? He's the incumbent.
Yeah, Michael Adams, the incumbent Secretary of State, who a number of issues here has stood up for the integrity of the elections in his state and nationally. It has won this thing. It looks like, at the last I checked, it's close to 30 points here. So it's a solid or 30, 35 point victory for him.
Do you read anything into that, given the fact that he was pretty proudly not an election denier, right? And this is Kentucky. This is, in a lot of ways, Trump country. The fact that he won so handily, is that mean, how do you read that?
It's tough to say because we had a few of these last year. I think of the Nebraska Secretary of State's race last year. Believe it or not, there was a similar situation in Nebraska where two Trump-aligned Republicans came after a sort of moderate on election issues Republican Secretary of State in the primary and didn't win and didn't come that close. So we saw a number of these secretaries of state last year actually survive, and actually in many cases survive easily. So, and sometimes there was a temptation in that primary, that primary season last year, to read those as indicators that the party was moving away from Donald Trump. But then you would see the party in other ways move much more closely to Donald Trump in some of its other candidate selections. So I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but we've seen a signal like we're getting out of Kentucky before in that Secretary of State's primary.
I read it as a good sign for democracy that the person who's running the state elections does not believe in election denialism. Speaking of election deniers, let's talk about the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court. We reminded our viewers right before the break that Patricia McCullough, the woman who is, I believe she's an appellate court judge, is running for a seat on the State Supreme Court. She is the one judge that handed Trump a victory in 2020, which Team Trump has never forgotten. What can you tell me about that race and the likelihood that she will be sitting on the State Supreme Court when the 2024 election rolls around?
So the votes are being counted right now. Carolyn Carluccio is her opponent in the Republican primary. The state Republican Party has endorsed Carluccio. They believe she's electable in the general election. They don't believe that McCullough is electable in the general election. The last I checked before I came out here, Carluccio was slightly ahead. I'm talking about 4 points ahead in the tally. It looked like one of the dynamics in this race is there's an east-west divide in Pennsylvania, kind of the Philly-Pittsburgh divide. It looked like there was a little bit more disproportionately vote from the western part of the state, which is McCullough's part of the state, than from Carluccio's eastern part of the state. So it's too close to call. It's a tight election. And the other factor worth considering, I think, in all of this, too, is you remember last year in Pennsylvania, a big story was Doug Mastriano, the Republican candidate for governor, aligned himself with all of Trump's claims about 2020. He has strongly thrown his support behind McCullough in this race. He is considering running for the United States Senate from Pennsylvania next year. So in some ways, I think this could be a little bit of a test of Mastriano's lingering strength in the Republican Party as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that if McCullough is elected to the state Supreme Court, it will not change the balance of the power on the court, right? Much like, I mean, not like the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race that we had national attention, but it is still meaningful. It's right now Democrats have a 4-2 majority. If a Republican got one of those seats, that would be a 4-3 majority. In a state like Pennsylvania, one of the swingiest states in the country, in a presidential election year, in any election year, the balance of the Supreme Court really very, very much matters. I got to ask you about the Pennsylvania State House, because that is also a body that matters in that state. And whether or not you think the balance of power tips back to Republicans, the Democrats have had it for just a handful of what feels like hours.
Right. They finally won it last November after 12 years of trying. Coming into tonight with these vacancies, Democrats had a 1-seat edge in the Pennsylvania State House. Now, you mentioned there's that one Republican district. It was expected. It's now happened. The Republicans won. So that ties it. And now it's come down to this 1 seat. It's a vacancy, had been held by a Democrat. It's in Delaware County, which is right outside of Philadelphia. What we've got counted in this district so far are just the mail-in ballots. Remember, the mail-in ballots are always, especially in Pennsylvania, heavily Democratic. The Democrat has won the mail-in ballots by 50 points. This is a district that voted solidly for Joe Biden, voted solidly Democratic in last year's midterm elections. We got to see some actual same-day results before we can say anything definitive. But that's a heck of a hill for, I think, the Republican to climb there in a district where the terrain is already hostile to Republicans to begin with.
A heck of a hill, in Kornacki speak to me, says Democrats might hold on to this.
I think the Democrats are looking at what they're seeing in that district and feeling more confident than the Republicans now. But let's see.
The always wise Steve Kornacki.
Always hedging.
Always hedging, Steve Kornacki. It's always great to see you, my friend. Thanks for being here.